back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Today is Tuesday, September 15th, 2015, 9:15:15. Joining us on the line today, he's on the road, but still carving out a little bit of time for us here at the Ed Morrissey Show. The Prince of Twitter, at A.H. Malcolm. Andrew Malcolm, of course, Investors Business Daily, investors.com/Andrew Malcolm. Welcome back to the show, sir. Great to have you back with us.
Thank you. It's really good to be here. It wouldn't be life without Tuesday with Ed.
Well, we're going to go ahead and just cut to the chase here because I know we don't have much time. You are deep undercover on a mission.
Yeah, no, I'm on vacation.
Not on vacation. So. Well, that's the same thing. You're deep undercover on vacation, and that's the way it should be. But so you're on vacation, but what stories have grabbed your attention, even though you're trying your best to ignore them? What's coming up? What's coming up for you?
Well, I only started a few hours ago, so I should be up to speed. I must admit, what I'm trying to do, and I think probably you're the same way, Ed, is looking at this amazing field of Republican candidates, and is to keep an open mind to see into the thoughts, the processes. I'm particularly interested in the mannerisms and the thought processes of these people. To keep an open mind so that we let the competition among the full field play out. And so I'm intrigued these days with Ben Carson and with Carly Fiorina. I'm sad to see Rick Perry go. I did and I hope we'll see him. Who knows? Maybe as a vice presidential candidate, but in a Republican cabinet anyway. He'd make a great defense secretary. It's interesting. There used to have Republican candidates. Virtually all of them had military time on their resume, and in fact, all of them since Eisenhower, right?
Yeah.
This time, only two candidates were served in the military: Lindsey Graham and Rick Perry, who was a C-130 pilot all over the world.
Yep.
For years. So I think he'd make a great Secretary of Defense. I did a column for Saturday morning on his departure from the race and recounting, and at the time I saw him as the first genuine conservative victim of the Trump show, reality show. So it's a shame, but that's why they play the game, as they say. There's a wonderful story, which I shared with you in advance, that Rick Santorum told a while back during the 2012 race. And remember, at times in that race, Rick Perry was on top of the polls. They had a debate, and all the candidates were, not 17 of them, but they were all gathered around a table and talking, and Santorum tells the story. Of course, he was always telling the story of his challenged daughter, Bella, who has a very rare disease that she's been battling all her life. And but he also noticed during the debate that most of the candidates were scribbling on a pad in front of them to remind themselves of points they wanted to make as others were talking. But Rick Perry didn't do that. And then all of a sudden, at one point in the debate, Rick Perry wrote something on his pad, but only one time. So after the debate, they were all shaking hands, and Santorum maneuvered himself over to shake Rick Perry's hand and to look down on the pad. And Rick Perry, during the presidential debate, had written down 3 words: "Pray for Bella."
Yeah, that's a really great story.
And it is, and it's so revealing of the person, and of the values. And one of the things that impresses me, well, in life in general, but also in political life, is people who live the walk as well, or who live the walk as well as talk the walk, or whatever it is. People who live the way they talk. And so Rick Perry's departure was very graceful, and he didn't mention anybody by name except his good friend Bobby Jindal, whom you may remember back in 2012 stuck with Perry well beyond the others.
Yeah.
So I think he's going to, Perry will reciprocate this time, but he didn't mention anybody except Jindal, but it was pretty clear at one point when he said that, geez, I wish I had the phrase in front of me. It was very well put, but basically that we need someone who doesn't just talk loud, but someone who has real substance and record to them. And one can imagine he was referring to Donald Trump, but
one
Trump
can imagine
replied very gracefully. I mean, if you knock somebody out of the race, there's no reason to pile on. So there's that, and I'll be very interested in the debate tomorrow night to see how Carly Fiorina does on the main stage. In a couple of the polls, she's now moved up to third behind Carson and Trump. So we'll see. There were over 6 million who watched the secondary debate back on August 6th. So even though 24 million is many more times, but so it'll be a good opportunity for her to be seen and to impress people, and most importantly, I suppose, to impress donors.
I'm interested to see whether or not Fiorina and Trump are going to get into it, because Trump's been hammering her on her HP experience, which is completely fair, right? I mean, she's running on that, and it's completely fair topic. But then he went after her for her looks, and Fiorina turned that into a brilliant marketing opportunity.
Didn't she? Yeah.
I mean, it was really a smart move on her part, and so the stage is set here a little bit with some of these, little personal digs that Donald Trump has been giving out. The stage is set for a rather interesting and contentious debate. Last time around, people didn't really go after Donald Trump so much as Donald Trump and the moderators went after each other. I mean, are you looking for more of we got to knock this guy off the top of the hill sort of approach from some of the other Republicans on the debate stage?
Well, I don't think that they can appear to be pushed around, but I think they want to talk more about themselves and their ideas than they do Trump. And it's a very tricky line to walk, whether you honor your opponent by talking or criticizing what he or she is saying, or whether you talk more about yourself and kind of dismiss the opponent when they try their showbiz. Remember that wonderful moment in the Bush-Gore debate where Gore left his podium and off camera tried to intimidate Bush by invading his space on the stage, and Bush just looked at him and like, what are you doing, man? And then went back to talking. You didn't have to say a word. It just made Gore look small. I thought that you're absolutely right about what Fiorina's response, and Trump said that, look at that face. Can you imagine voting for that face? It's typical of his attitude towards women, I guess. But
it certainly seems that way.
And she replied on the podium later that day or the next day, and she said, "Ladies, look at this face. It's 61 years old, and I'm proud of every day and every wrinkle." And I think a lot of people, even guys, can really relate to that.
Yeah.
Instead of even saying Trump's name, she just repeated his words, and everybody knew who she was talking about without talking. And then she turned it into that wonderful ad with other women saying, "Look at my face, look at my face, look at my face." So I think, we're not going to see her go up against Hillary Clinton, if at all, or for a while. But it should be a really good debate. I hope the moderators, and our mutual friend Hugh Hewitt is one of them, from Salem. I hope. I don't know. These formats are so stilted. 30 seconds.
Yeah, I agree.
What can you say in 30 seconds? But the setting is wonderful. Did you see it? It's like almost right under the wing of Air Force One at the Reagan Library. So Tapper tweeted out what his view from the moderators table will be.
Oh, I missed that. I've been kind of off Twitter for the most part for the last few days. I come on and off because I'm working on a project, a still unnamed project, but it's coming to a conclusion here, hopefully, or at least a first conclusion here pretty quick. But I'm going to actually be less on Twitter for the next couple of weeks because of it.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to fill in for you and retweet your best stuff. People can follow my timeline, and every morning I have the best of Ed.
Do you really?
I do. I tweet one of yours every morning. Yes.
Oh my gosh. I don't know why I'm not seeing that. I got to check my notifications column a little bit more often, I guess. That's
well,
awesome.
If you're not paying attention, that's okay. I know it's good. I'm just telling the world.
Well, of course, and we've got you here every Tuesday, so we get a chance to check in with the Prince. But yeah, what is going to be your key? What's going to be your key in the upcoming debate? Because I think for me, the key is going to be connecting in a passionate way on economics, and I think. To an extent, that's why Trump is winning right now. He's more connecting in an emotional way to the frustration that people are feeling. But I every election comes down to pocketbook issues, and voters want to know that the person who they're going to vote for at least understands, what their particular economic situation is. And so I'm looking for somebody who's going to drill in on that. I don't think, although it should be, I don't think the Iran deal is going to be a big key for voters this year. I don't think that Syria and the refugee crisis is going to be as big of a deal as people might think it could be. I still think it comes down to pocketbook issues. And as much as I hate to quote James Carville, I think he's right. It comes down to the economy. Every single presidential election eventually comes down to the economy.
Yeah, it does eventually, but I don't think we're there yet. I think we're a ways from it. And people are still evaluating the person and the feel and the sense that they have of whether they could be president. They had that poll showing 33% far on top favor Trump of Republicans and 20% favor Carson. But what most other people didn't see was 60% don't see themselves ever voting for Trump. So 60% plus his 33%, I don't think he's quite reached the ceiling yet. But I think after tomorrow's debate, we'll see Carson rise and get much closer, if not ahead of Trump.
He's getting there.
People don't. You and I are just talking here, but it doesn't seem to me this time that people are paying attention yet to programmatic details. Now, Walker tried to make a big splash yesterday with his op-ed talking about abolishing federal unions, which of course is his big credit in Wisconsin, and he he's got to do something because he's been fading, even in Iowa next door. So he's trying to do something on programs. But did you hear people talking after the first debate about any policy points?
No.
First of all, it was it was all fireworks with Trump and Megyn Kelly, and then people want to like Carson, and so what they seized on was nothing that he said about any details, because I don't remember any. What they seized on was his closing statement, in which he said that he's the only one on the stage that had taken out half a brain, although looking at Washington, it looks like some other people had beat him to it. That's a great debate line. I don't know that qualifies anybody as president, but it's a good debate line, and it's a showbiz thing. But this is what people are talking about, and people talked about Fiorina on the secondary debate, because you may remember that Trump consulted with Bill Clinton before the first debate, and Fiorina made a point of saying, I guess Clinton called Trump, and Fiorina made a point of saying, geez, I don't know about anybody else here on this stage, but I didn't get a call from Bill Clinton to consult about these debates. Did you? Well, I didn't. And sort of making the point that here's Trump talking to Democrats, which, of course, is what he's done for so many years. So nobody was given credit or accolades for their policy points. Jindal is the one who's been making them over and over and over again, and he's one of the lower ones. He's probably the smartest guy on either one of those stages, but he's very serious. Jeb has been making some policy points. His economic program came out. Trump's came out, but it didn't have hardly any details. So I don't know. I think we're still at the stage, at least I am, of watching it and getting a feel for the person, how they handle this pressure. And I have to say, having been at these debates, both as media and behind the scenes with a particular politician, that's a big pressure deal. It might not look that way. Most of them look self-possessed, but it's huge pressure. And when people can make a lasting decision on the qualifications of somebody for president based on Ronald Reagan saying, "I'm not going to hold youth against my opponent."
Right. Great line.
To defuse his age issue. Or what was the other one I was going to mention? There was another one where they just go, oh, you remember Lloyd Benson saying, Quayle, about Quayle, I knew Senator Kennedy and you're no Senator Kennedy. It's great showbiz, but it's got nothing to do with being a president. But you do want to get a feel for the person. Can you imagine Donald Trump with the nuclear launch codes? Could you imagine Ben Carson? What kind of people would they hire? Who are they surrounding themselves with? What is their faith? Do they have a faith? So I'm less interested in how much they'd reduce the capital gains tax than I am in seeing them on their feet, addressing unexpected questions, being respectful to others, but also sharp on their toes. And I have to say that so far, Fiorina has impressed me the most.
Well, Andrew, I know we're just about out of time. You got to get back to your family on your vacation. I want to thank you for coming with us. I don't know if you have any jokes. I'll leave it open, but if you didn't...
Oh, yeah. You know me. I've always got jokes. So
Okay.
Jimmy Fallon this week, he said that a senior Trump aide says that he quit because of all the feuds and public spats in the Trump campaign. And then Trump replied saying he fired the aide for quitting. Jimmy Fallon also said that Hillary Clinton has lost a third of her support in Iowa just since the spring. but there's a lot of debate as to whether she lost the support or deleted it.
Yeah, that's a big question. Big question now.
Finally, Anthony Weiner, this is a Jimmy Fallon line, Anthony Weiner has denied that his wife, Clinton aide Huma Abedin, gave him any classified material. And as we all know, nothing quite puts a rumor to rest as an Anthony Weiner denial.
Yeah, right. Did you see where a PR firm hired him and one of the executives quit? No, this is not a joke.
I didn't see the quitting part.
No, one of the executives quit over it, said that he was going to leave because over a difference of opinion because they had hired Anthony Weiner. And my question is, what kind of a PR firm hires Anthony Weiner? I mean, this is not a guy who was distinguished in the way that he handled his public relations.
And as I recall, it was a crisis management PR firm.
It is a crisis management PR firm. And so Gerald Beer at the Weekly Standard said he's going to be handling Huma Resources. Which, this is a politically connected hire, right? I mean, this is a politically connected hire. There's no doubt about that. And so, yeah, that was what Gerald Beer's line. She's going to handle Huma Resources.
That's a great one. So maybe you should have jokes every week.
No. You are the master of jokes for the Ed Morrissey Show. You are also the prince of Twitter at A.H. Malcolm, where you can find these jokes all the time. Andrew tweets these things out. If you're not already following Andrew, you must be new to Twitter. That's all I can tell you.
Well, actually, this morning I published, I was on an airplane, but it published by itself, this week's collection of jokes. So if you go to investors.com/Andrew Malcolm, you'll get even more than these three.
There you go. You'll get them all, because Andrew is the man who collects them. All right, Andrew, back to vacation with you. No show next week. Right. No show next week, but we'll talk to you in 2 weeks, right?
Okay. See you then, everybody.
See you then.
Thanks, Ed.
Andrew Malcolm, thank you, sir. Andrew Malcolm of Investors Business Daily has been my guest. And right now we're going to go ahead and give Salena Zito a call. So bear with me for just a moment while we get her on the line. This is the fun of being your own producer. It's what we do. I should have music playing when I'm doing that, of course, but I don't. I never do. So we're giving her a shout right now. She's just been tweeting out that she's coming on the show, so I know she's expecting the phone call. I want to thank everybody for being with us today. Fun day. Next week, there will be no shows. That's what I just want to make sure that I'll mention it at the end of the show as well. I'm going to take next week off from all of the...
Hi there.
Hello, Salena Zito. How are you?
I'm swell. How are you?
Doing good. Now, I know that you're on the campaign trail these days. Where are you at the moment? What are you covering?
Actually, I'm in the newsroom in Pittsburgh.
Oh.
We had an announcement yesterday, a little bit of a disruptive announcement to the Democratic Party with a Braddock mayor jumping into the race.
Aha, okay. And so, in which race was he jumping into?
In a U.S. Senate race between Joe Sestak and Katie McGinty, the former chief of staff to the Democratic Governor Tom Wolf. Those two were running against each other. Sestak, everyone has been trying to get rid of him from the race, from establishment Democrats in Washington to the state Democrats, because he basically doesn't play well with others. He, does his own thing, and, they wanted someone who would, listen to them. And so they got McGinty to jump in the race after spending a year of going through a whole bunch of different people and begging them to jump in. And now Fetterman, who is like 6'8", he looks like he'd be a linebacker for the Steelers rather than a Senate race. Bald, goatee, tattoos, but he's settled in this old Rust Belt city called Braddock, named after the general, has turned this city around slowly, but nonetheless turned it around. And I think he makes the race really interesting.
Wow, okay. So you were at home then when you were watching the Trump rally. I wasn't sure if because you had pinged me during the Trump rally to see if I was watching it. So so you were watching it from home. What were your takeaways from the Trump rally last night? I mean, this guy's drawing 15,000 people to these events. It's a big deal.
It's a big deal. I'd like to put it a little bit in perspective. Texas is Texas, just like Alabama is Alabama. People don't get to usually see presidential contenders in those states.
True, because they're definitely not swing states. Yeah,
they're not swing states. They're reliable Republican states. They don't even play into the primary process. So seeing a presidential candidate is rare. Seeing one that is also a entertainer and sort of celebrity is even more rare. So it's part spectacle, and I mean, here's what I think: I think it's more spectacle than anything else, because the man didn't even get through halfway through each sentence, and they were cheering what he said.
Wow!
And I mean, I think by election day, American voters end up wanting whoever they pick to be about something other than themselves.
Yes, I think that's true. They want them to be about them as much as they possibly can. And I'm not naive about this, and I don't think most voters are naive about this either. Most voters understand that these people have egos and that they are running to be president because they want to be president, but they have to have a connection to Trump. Now, I would argue right now they have a connection to Trump, but it's a connection about the status of the Republican Party. And he's kind of just encouraging them to come along. And Bernie Sanders is pretty much the same thing.
He's mirrored the exact same thing.
Right, exactly. It's the same problem for both parties, is that they have alienated a significant part of their traditional base by promising things and not delivering.
Well, yes, and no. I would argue that that the DNC under Dean was not someone you would have seen the Democrats being against. The Democrats rank and file. I think under Debbie Wasserman Schultz, I think there's a complete and total disconnect. I think Republican rank and file and the people that are, attracted to Trump are mad at Boehner and McConnell. Although I've made this point to you before, I find that fascinating because they're basically railing against exactly what they voted for, which was in 2010 and 2014. They elected them to be the brakes on Obama. I mean, elections are either brake pedals or gas pedals. With gas pedals in, they're like, let's go, let's do this, we'll support what you're doing, we're going to elect more of your party because we like the way the direction of the country is going. Brake pedals are when you elect the opposite and put more hurdles against whoever the president is to stop what they're doing. So, in essence, voters voted for these guys to stop Obama. But they are now unsatisfied with just plain stopping. They want more. So they're kind of angry at themselves. And I mean, who amongst us isn't, right? I mean, who of us have not really wanted something? We really wanted to do something, and we knew that this was the best way out of it. And then we do it, and we realize, well, that didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so I think we're self-reflecting, right?
Right.
We put these guys in office, and then we're like, well, this didn't turn out the way I wanted to. Yes, I voted them to put the brakes on, but now that they put the brakes on, I'm unsatisfied because they didn't do something. And they can't do something because they don't have a supermajority.
Or they don't have the presidency. And that's what this cycle is about.
And they don't have the presidency.
Right.
At the end of the day, the guy that's at the top of the pile, the president, he does have the most power. It doesn't matter, even if both chambers are Republican dominated, he still can find a way to get through the things that he wants to, whether it's through Congress the way he's supposed to or through executive order.
And this is getting to a point that's coming up in the chat room right now. I'm going to address this because our chat room is amazing and sharp. What exactly stopped? I mean, I think this is part of the issue, right? I mean, we talk about brake pedals and stuff like. What did they stop? The Iran deal went through. They haven't stopped Obama's executive orders on immigration, at least not yet. Planned Parenthood is still going to get funded probably at the end of the day, and there's reasons for all of these. And because I'm a bit of a policy wonk, and I'm also kind of a civics wonk, I understand the reasons for these things. But seriously, what since the 2014 election has stopped with the Republican majority? The only thing I can tell you that for sure has stopped is the fact that we've stopped failing to pass a budget resolution, but I don't think that that's something that people put on the bumper stickers on the back of their cars.
Right. I totally understand that, but nonetheless, that was always the reality going into that.
Absolutely. I understand that, but I mean, I get
people don't want to hear that, but that is the reality. I mean, if you can't, go in and individually force other states to go red in a Senate race, or it's in the Senate race. I mean, that was the biggest problem, and there weren't enough. A lot won. Trust me, that was a huge wave election.
Yeah,
but just not enough because of the way that the Senate is set up. So you needed the 60.
Well, you needed the 60, or you needed the presidency, and they didn't get it in 2012. And so, yeah, I mean, I could look at there was no way they were getting to 60 in 2014. I mean, just simply put, they didn't have enough. They might have gotten to 55, and that was as far as it was going to go. And that was as far, right? That was the high water mark. As far as they could go. So, and you couldn't get the presidency because the presidency wasn't up. Right.
I think at some point, voters will start to settle down and realize that to make their vote most important, they have to make sure that and this is if you're a Republican, that they have to make sure that the Republicans not only keep the majority, but maybe get, and there is possibility, maybe get an extra seat or two.
Well, sure.
And obviously the presidency.
Well, I'd say the presidency, and then make sure you don't lose the majority in the Senate, because that's actually the risk going into 2016.
Well, and that's what happens with populism, right?
Right.
I mean, populism is good and wonderful in that it stirs things up, but it also can be incredibly dangerous. You have to also remember that we have never in our entire history ever elected a populist president. People will say, whoa, what about Andrew Jackson? Andrew Jackson never ran as a populist. Absolutely never ran as one. He ran as the successor to George Washington's legacy, as a man who served in the military and as a man who had the calm demeanor to be able to lead his troops and lead the country. Now, people made him populist. They called him, the first, people's president. But Andrew Jackson was not a populist.
So your feeling, do you feel then, watching these rallies, and again, 15,000 may not be as big of a significance if you're doing it in Texas, where you don't see a whole lot of presidential contenders anyway.
So 1,000 in Iowa, let's put it in perspective. I know there was a big football game going on Saturday, but there was 1,000 in Iowa. And whether Iowa is... Iowa matters.
Iowa matters. New Hampshire matters.
I know he's ahead in the polls, but Iowa does matter. So if we didn't get 15,000 people in Iowa,
let me ask you. Let me put this to you, because this is something that I'm thinking about. And you get the budget fight coming up in the next few weeks in Washington D.C., and that's going to take. We're going to get a continuing resolution at some point, just because everybody's, nothing's been resolved, right? So either you're going to get it over the Planned Parenthood thing, which I don't think is going to happen, or you're going to get it over the budget caps. What the Republicans are, at least Reed Ribble was telling us last week here on the show, Republicans are actually willing to go to a shutdown in order to hold on to the budget caps. And so you're likely to get to a shutdown scenario one way or the other. But does that, if Republicans stand up and hold the line on something like that, does that improve the chances for other Republicans in this race to make a dent, to start to, for voters to start to come around and say, hey, look, maybe we need to choose somebody who has got a little bit more serious chance? Or do you think that the time has kind of run out on that, and they're just looking for somebody who's going to kick not just the Democrats' butts, but also the Republicans' butts?
I mean, it's hard to predict what happens, right? Everyone in 2013 thought, the pundits thought that the Republicans were going to pay a price for the 2013 shutdown, and they would not win the majority in 2014. And there are a lot of people that are out there that are basically saying, we did anyway. What they seem to forget is that right after the shutdown, there was this thing called the rollout of Obamacare, which pretty much sucked out all the attention away from the shutdown, and we spent 5 months watching this debacle roll out. And so I would never, ever say that the shutdown in 2013 had a positive impact on the 2014 midterm elections. Personally, I think that the shutdown is probably a mistake. It probably hurts the Republicans if they want to hold the majority, but I think they're in such a foul mood that they probably don't think what I personally think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. All right, so we've only got a couple minutes left. What are you working on next? What's your next column going to be about?
I was taking a look at Rand Paul and sort of the firewall that he has set up out west and in the south. And so he's gaming this, and I think he's gaming it wisely in that this is going to be a long primary race. So with that in mind, he has built up money and grassroots support and infrastructure in states that people aren't thinking about, but that come into play in March. And we're probably looking at a primary race. I'm not predicting it, but I'm certainly thinking it's in the realm of possibility that happens. And I take a look at him and what he's done, and who else is out there that's running that has also put up safety measures because they believe that this thing is going to go long, and they have the support built up to win the delegates in the states for the long run.
It's curious because of all the people who are in the lower tier of, and I'm not talking about the Gilmores and Patakis, I'm talking about the lower tier of let's say the people who are going to be on stage tomorrow night, Rand Paul being among them. He's never actually had a moment, right? I mean, Scott Walker's had a moment. Marco Rubio kind of had a moment. Right. Jeb Bush certainly has had a moment. But he's not really had a moment. Fiorina's about to have a moment, I think. Ben Carson obviously absolutely has. But he's never really had a moment. And I'm just curious as to whether or not he's ever going to get one at this stage.
Well, it's hard. I mean, like you said, that's really, really hard to predict. But I think each of them will have, not every single one of them, but I think that they'll all have a moment. I think this is a very unsettled electorate, and it's a very angry electorate. But angry in this country rarely ever wins. We tend to go for aspirational in the end. We start out all fidgety. And sort of against the status quo. I've been, and I've had this. You had me on the show forever talking about this populist thing. It's been going on since 2012. At the end of 2012, that's sort of when it began. You saw evidence of it in the people that didn't show up to vote in November of 2012.
Right.
On both sides of the aisle. I mean, that's one of the things about populism that people rarely understand. But to get back to your question, I think Rand Paul has the opportunity, if he seizes it, he can certainly rise up in the voters' minds, and they'll take a second look at him. I still think it's early. I still think a lot can happen, and I'm still not buying anyone's a for sure thing on either side of the aisle.
Well, Salena, we're just going to have to wait and see what's coming up next for you, and the Rand Paul thing, and wherever else your reporting takes you. Of course, you can find it at the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. That's triblive.com. You can also find it at Real Clear Politics. Her columns always get picked up by RCP. And you can find Salena on Twitter at Salena Zito Trib. And if you're not following her already, you're really missing out. So be sure to do that. Salena, thanks for coming on today. Really great to talk to you again.
Thanks for having me on. I forgot to point out I am going to be in South Carolina for the first 2 weeks of October, so that should be interesting.
That will be interesting. The third state in the Republican triad.
I think that's the state to look at.
Interesting. Social conservative. Interesting state. And we'll see we'll see who resonates in South Carolina. All right, Salena. Well, thanks again. Maybe we'll try to get you while you're out in South Carolina and get an update from what's going on out there then.
Sounds groovy. Thank you.
Thanks, Salena.
Bye-bye.
Salena Zito has been our guest for the second segment, and now we're going to go ahead and give Dr. Ryan Anderson a call. Ryan Anderson from heritage.org, author of Truth Overruled, and we're going to talk to him about that. We're going to talk to him about the Kim Davis issue, and he's got some thoughts about that, and we might have a little bit of a debate on that one. Seems like it's been resolved. We'll see. It just depends on how the courts handle this. But we'll find out soon enough. Ryan, it's Ed Morrissey from Hot Air. How are you doing, sir?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing good. And we're live on the air on the Ed Morrissey Show. So thanks for joining us. And my goodness, interesting week. Who knew that the center of political focus would be Rowan County, Kentucky? Who could have guessed that?
No one could have predicted this.
Well, you might have predicted something like it, at least, in your book, Truth Overruled. The Kim Davis controversy started because she is the elected county clerk. They elect the county clerk in Rowan County. All of the marriage licenses carry her name, and she did not want her name going out on licenses that were issued for same-sex marriage. Refused to issue any licenses at all for any couples, got hauled into court, jailed for contempt of court, released, promised not to, or at least agreed not to interfere with the issuance of licenses, and now they've worked out some deal where certain licenses are issued with the note that they were issued under federal order without her name on them. Kind of a mess here, and it's a messy thing to pick through this because there are certainly implications for religious freedom, but it's not the same thing as the cases involving, say, bakers and photographers and florists in the private sector. I mean, this is a person who's elected to a county office, Ryan, who is the sole monopoly for issuing licenses that are recognized by the state. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, great question. I mean, Kim Davis is really kind of the symbol of what happens when political leaders can't work together to reach common sense win-win outcomes. Because Davis had been petitioning the legislature in the months leading up to the Supreme Court decision, and then the governor in the months after the Supreme Court decision, to find a solution in which she and her office wouldn't have to be the ones that would be issuing these licenses either with her name or through her authority, but in which same-sex couples, or in this case all legally eligible couples, would receive the license. And North Carolina acted ahead of time. They passed a bill that would protect the rights of conscience for magistrates and clerks. The governor vetoed it. The North Carolina legislature then went back and overrode his veto. And so, I mean, I think there's a certain sense in which some people were cheering the fact that she was in jail. Some people were saying she should just resign. They weren't willing to even consider, can we find a solution in which every legally eligible couple would receive the license, but no clerk would have to violate their beliefs. The only other thing I'll say about the last thing you said is that there are three different types of cases. There are the private sector cases, the baker, the florist, the photographer. They're the public employee context, on the other kind of extreme. And then somewhere in between, they're the nonprofit charities and what happens to their nonprofit tax status, their accreditation, government contracts, things like that. And we need to think of those three as three separate buckets of religious liberty concerns.
Well, in this case, I mean, it wasn't just the fact that that this was a public employee. This is an elected official, right? If it was a public employee or an appointee, let's say it was an appointee who serves at the pleasure of some executive, whether it's the governor, whether it's the mayor, whether it's the county commissioners or the county executive director, that person, I mean, a person like that, if Kim Davis was in that situation, she might find herself terminated because she wasn't fulfilling the duties of the office. What was unusual about this is that she was elected. She's an elected county clerk, and you can't terminate her. You can recall her, but you can't terminate her. And I found that just the political geek in me, I just was kind of fascinated by this, because people say, well, just fire her. And I have to remind people, she was elected to office. You can't fire somebody who's elected to office. You can recall them, but you can't fire them. And that's, I think...
And then, although had she just been a normal employee, firing her might have been illegal. Because had she been a regular employee, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act would have applied to her, and Title VII would have required... Title VII does require a reasonable accommodation for all employees, including governmental employees, that doesn't place undue burden. So a reasonable accommodation that doesn't place undue burden on the employer. And I think that the outcome that we now see is a reasonable accommodation that hasn't placed an undue burden on the state. So, her name's not on the license. She's writing in that this is being issued under the authority of the district court. A deputy clerk's issuing the license. Couples are receiving the license. And so there's an argument to be made that she's now showed us that there was a way to reasonably accommodate her conviction without creating an undue burden on third parties.
I haven't followed up much on this. I haven't seen too many legal interpretations. I would assume that you've probably seen a little bit more about that than this, because frankly, I just haven't had the time to see post this arrangement, how well it's working out. But have you seen any legal opinions as to whether or not those licenses actually are valid under Kentucky state law? Because I'm not necessarily sure that they are.
And that's the question. Today, the governor announced that they are valid. So the governor has announced that for his purposes, the state of Kentucky and the executive office will be treating them as valid licenses.
I'm not sure that works, though.
The governor's position on this, that's the direction he's given to Kentucky offices, that they should treat these as valid licenses.
Fine, but it's not really the governor's call. Let me give you the issue. Okay, you've got one of these licenses, and it says, issued by federal order. Now, the statute apparently says that it has to have the clerk's name on it. And if the clerk's name isn't on it, technically it doesn't sit in concordance with the statute. Now, if I'm incorrect about that, please, feel free to correct me. If that's the case, and somebody decides that, 6 months down the road, I'm just going to challenge this because I was never actually legally married because the license was invalid. It's not the governor who's going to, certainly there's going to be some weight attached to it, but the court's going to take a look at this and say, let me look at the statute. The statute says the license has to say this, and it doesn't. I don't think a governor's opinion on this is going to matter much. I think the legislature still has to act in order to retroactively make these licenses valid and to make them valid going forward. I mean, neither one of us are lawyers, Ryan, so I apologize for laying this one on you, but honestly, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, it's only going to last until somebody actually challenges this, and then it's going to get ugly.
Right. And I think this is the best way for listeners right now to think. This is why we need the grown-ups in the room to enact these sorts of policies that can protect the rights of conscience and the ability of legally eligible couples to receive their licenses. So we don't end up in these sorts of situations where no one quite knows, what's up, right? No one quite knows what the real legal status of these licenses are, even though the governor has suggested he's going to view them as valid. No one has placed that legal challenge, so a judge hasn't ruled on it. I think the most important thing here is say we need to find a way to move forward in this country after the Supreme Court ruling, where each and every one of these cases doesn't have to be litigated in a court of law. And so can we craft public policy that will protect the baker, the florist, the photographer, that will protect Catholic charity adoption agencies, that will protect Wheaton College and Gordon College, and it will protect government employees within a reasonable balancing test of, government needs to do certain things, but so how can we protect civil servants from not necessarily having to be the ones that do those things if possible?
My concern on this, Ryan, and I mean, I took some flack for this, but my concern over this was that at least in the theoretical, because Monster in the chat room is right. They haven't fixed the laws in Kentucky, so it's the question of what statutes are you supposed to follow at this point in time? And that's part of the problem of having a court mandate this sort of thing, as they did in Obergefell, as opposed to, say, in Minnesota or in New Hampshire, where it was passed legislatively. They amended all the statutes properly, so everybody knew what was going on. Kim Davis had basically two sets of laws which are in contradiction with each other. But at the end of I don't want to say that. The practical problem that faced people in Rowan County was they had a legitimate right to expect that the government was going to be responsive to their legitimate requests for licenses, and especially since the government assumes a monopoly on that particular issue, that the licensing of marriages, officials should be acting in accordance with that, at least for those who fit within the statutory limits of what it was that they're supposed to be issuing. The idea that you're going to shut them all down so you don't get sued for 14th Amendment violations, to me is a statement of saying maybe you shouldn't be in that job.
Well, yes and no. So, I mean, what's interesting here is that the United States has a long history of accommodating civil servants in a variety of settings. So when we had pacifists in the post office who refused to process draft cards, we didn't say deliver all of the mail or leave your job. We accommodated them by assigning them to other tasks within the Postal Service. When we had vegetarians who didn't want to pass out coupons for a burger joint, we accommodated them. In fact, in Kentucky, there's an accommodation for vegetarians and animal rights activists who are county clerks to not have to issue hunting licenses. So we accommodated them. We didn't say do every aspect of the job or find a new job. I think something very similar is true here, that if we can find a way in which every citizen will receive the documents to which they are entitled, but in which no civil servant will be forced to violate their beliefs, the laws of Kentucky and the laws of the United States require us to find that solution.
Yeah,
that's what the Kentucky Religious Freedom Restoration Act and the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act require of us when it comes to these sorts of issues.
Right. No, I totally agree with you on that. And, we had this great discussion about this about a couple of months ago, actually, on these very same topics. And so messy cases make for bad laws, I think, in some cases. And bad laws make for some very, very messy cases. And I think that was what was going on with Kim Davis.
I think that's exactly right. And that's why it was incumbent upon the legislators, the governor, even the judge could have ordered the accommodation himself under, had they been in a state court. I mean, the problem here is that it was a federal judge, but it's a state Kentucky RFRA, and I don't know how that interplay works out. But someone should have been able to have figured this out ahead of time. Kim Davis had been talking about this for several months. There was no reason why this had to end up in a Kentucky jail cell.
No. And I agree with you on that. I agree with you on that 100%. This was a major failure all the way around, and probably to some extent was egged on by media coverage and other things too. But no, I agree with you on that. This is something where the legislature and the government, everybody saw this coming, right? I was under no particular misapprehension about which direction the Supreme Court would go. I was a little surprised about the extent to where they went with it, but I wasn't terribly surprised by the Supreme Court decision. So these are the types of things that maybe should have, states. This was, by the way, this is two Democrats, right? This is Steve Beshear, who's a Democrat. He's governor of Kentucky.
Yep.
Kim Davis is a Democrat.
Issue here.
Yeah. Why weren't they preparing for that?
Oh, sorry. I mean, I just think that this is such a clear example of why we need to work together to find common sense compromises. There was no reason why the governor of Kentucky couldn't have said, here's how we're going to figure this out. If you're a Kentucky clerk that has an objection, here's the protocol on how to handle the objection. The original marriage licenses said bride and groom. That's what the citizens had voted on when they defined marriage as the union of a man and a woman, and then the governor's office, the executive branch, had issued these licenses accordingly. After the Supreme Court struck down Kentucky's marriage law, the executive office in Kentucky issued new marriage licenses, and they said party 1 and party 2.
Right.
At the same time as when they changed the marriage licenses to accommodate the same-sex couples, why couldn't they have changed the marriage licenses to accommodate someone like Kim Davis? It just strikes me that had they wanted to, they could have done, in a more formal way, what Kim Davis has now done informally. And there was no need to allow this to play out across the media and end up in a jail cell the way that it did, except that people didn't want to work together.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, I mean, that's ultimately, it's talking about this book that I've written. I wrote this book to show what we can now do to protect the future of marriage and religious freedom, right? I mean, how we can work together to solve some of these things ahead of time.
So what are your main suggestions in the book? I know we didn't get a chance to talk much about the book, but I do have it linked in the show post, by the way, folks. So be sure to check this out if you haven't already done so. Truth Overruled. Give us the bullet points here.
Sure. I mean, a couple of things. One is that we need to say that the Obergefell ruling is judicial activism. I mean, I think the people who caused this problem for Kim Davis were the 5 Supreme Court justices who redefined marriage, and in doing so, redefined her job. Davis had been working in the Rowan County Clerk's office for 27 years, first as a deputy, and then most recently as the elected head clerk. She's always faithfully executed the duties of her job until the Supreme Court changed her job after she had already been elected. And so, I mean, one thing is to say, this is just like what the court did in Roe v. Wade. It was judicial activism. The court struck down these pro-life laws. And we have to remember that. We're not the aggressors in this culture war. Judicial activists are the aggressors. They're the ones that have changed our laws undemocratically with no constitutional warrant. The next suggestion that I make in the book is that one of the things we should do now is what the pro-life movement did. They protected the rights of pro-lifers not to have to pay for abortion or perform abortion.
Right.
There were activists back in the 70s who wanted to make every doctor perform abortion, every healthcare plan pay for it, every Catholic hospital do it. The pro-lifers were successful at getting reasonable liberals to say, no, that's not right. You can be in favor of abortion while also being in favor of pro-lifers not having to be in favor of abortion. Can we do that on marriage? Can we get reasonable liberals to say, I'm in favor of gay marriage, but I'm in favor of the Catholic charity adoption agency not to be in favor of gay marriage. Yeah. I'm in favor of the evangelical college to live according to its convictions. I'm in favor of the baker, the florist, the photographer to be free as well. That's really important that we now do this.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that point. I would also argue that the one lesson that you learned from that the pro-life side learned, and they didn't learn it right away, was that you have to change the culture. And you see this with the CMP videos, right? They're bringing out things that people never knew about the abortion industry, but they're changing the culture. CMP videos people are jumping. I don't want to say jumping because that's not fair, but people are calling for federal defunding of Planned Parenthood, which is something that people have been trying to do for a long time. But they're not calling to pass laws that will abolish Planned Parenthood because I think they understand that they're not going to win that battle. The best way to fight this, to fight abortion, at least for the moment, while Roe v. Wade is still the precedent, is to convince people just how bad abortion is. And I think that probably since the mid-1980s, when things were getting kind of ugly, the pro-life movement has kind of shifted over the last 30 years to making that sort of positive cultural argument rather than the confrontational demonstration sort of argument. And it's been more effective. It works better. It just flat out works better. And as a result, you see slowly, nowhere near as fast as most of us would like, of course, Ryan, but slowly, Americans are becoming more pro-life. The younger generation is becoming more pro-life. It's the baby boomer generation that has been very pro-choice, and they are getting eclipsed. And I think that this is a cultural battle that you have to fight over decades. It won't.
That's exactly right.
It won't be won in one budget fight.
That's one of the things that I point out on the marriage issue. I say we have to learn from the pro-life movement that this won't be won in the next vote of Congress. This won't be won in the next general election. This will be several generations now. And one of the things that I point out in the book is that the legal redefinition of marriage could only take place when and where it does after a cultural redefinition of marriage. And It's heterosexuals who are to blame. It's not gays and lesbians. It's straight people who, for the past 40 or 50 years, made a mess of the family, whether it was premarital sex or non-marital childbearing, the hookup culture, the pornography epidemic, the high rates of divorce, the introduction of no-fault divorce laws. It's only after those cultural changes that unelected judges could say, oh, yeah, the male-female part doesn't matter either. So the last two chapters of the book just gives cultural strategies on what the church can do and what all Americans can do to strengthen marriage as an institution and how to live out the truth about marriage. I close with an idea from Pope Benedict. Pope Benedict's a world-class intellectual. He's debated Jürgen Habermas, the leading European intellectual, and he said that it's not the arguments of the philosophers and the theologians, even though Benedict himself is one of those. He says it's the lives of the saints that ultimately convert people. And if we live out the truth about marriage, that's going to be the best way to defend the truth about marriage in the long haul. If husbands and wives are faithful to each other, if mothers and fathers take their duties to their children seriously, if heterosexuals live out the truth about marriage, that's the best way to defend it.
Well put, Ryan. And of course, again, Truth Overruled. The link is in the show post. He's at heritage.org. You're on television all the time. So what's your next TV hit coming up? Where can people find you?
So, none are scheduled ahead of time. It only happens when something comes up. So when the Kim Davis thing happened, our listeners can Google this. I was on CNN twice, once on New Day, the morning show, and once on Anderson Cooper, the evening show. And then I had an op-ed in the New York Times. Of all places, I was published in the New York Times showing how we could find a better way forward on the Kim Davis situation. And so you can never plan these things ahead of time.
It's true. Got to roll with the punches, man.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, it's always great talking with you, and hopefully we're going to get you back on here a number of times in between all these fantastic media appearances that you're making every place else. But you can find him at heritage.org, New York Times occasionally now, and certainly his book, Truth Overruled. So be sure to check that out. Ryan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and roll into the finale here of the Ed Morrissey Show. I want to thank everybody for being with us. I want to thank Cranky T-Rex for doing the running the chat room. crankytrex.blogspot.com is his blog. He blogs at writes at buzzpo.com, occasionally at Hot Air. You can find him on Twitter at Cranky T-Rex. And so check that out because his Twitter feed is a lot of fun. Speaking of a lot of fun, the Monster's back with us at Sum Ergo Monstro. Great. I'm sorry about the mic levels. It just keeps kind of going up and down depending on who I'm talking to. So I'm sort of a movable target here with the mic levels. But at Sum Ergo Monstro, I think it's still e3gazette.blogspot.com, and he's going to correct me if I'm wrong because that's what Monster does. Great to have Monster back in the chat room. Great to have you around. I want to thank everybody else who's been in the chat room. We're going to run down the list in just a moment. But we are going to be back on Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Central, 1 on the left coast, with Dwayne Generalissimo Patterson of the Hugh Hewitt Show. I don't know if we're going to get any other guests yet or not. The week after that, I will be off the entire week, and it's possible, although unlikely, that I'll be off the following Tuesday as well, the 29th of September. Depends on project status and all of that kind of stuff and how much extra time I need. So let's just say that for right now, I'm off next week. I'm back the week after. If that changes, I'll find a way to let everybody know. But for the moment, that's where we're going. It'll be a game time call. So be sure to check that out on Thursday with Dwayne Generalissimo Patterson. We'll find out more about what's going on. We'll do a debate wrap-up on Thursday, and maybe we'll just go for a full hour with Dwayne, because I'm sure there's going to be a ton of stuff to unpack from the debate from Hugh Hewitt, who's going to be one of the panelists, and we're going to want to talk about that on Thursday. Maybe we'll try to get Hugh in here to talk about his experiences if he's available, and see how that turns out. It'll be interesting to see if there's an exchange between Donald Trump and Hugh Hewitt based on the little conflict they had last week or a week before last. So there's going to be a lot of there's going to be a lot of subplots, I think, going on around here. We may need the full hour on Thursday to unpack it. So let's just stick around for that. Where are the refunds? T-Rand wants to know. Yeah, you're going to get your money back, T-Rand. No problem. The check is in the mail. I promise you. All right, let's go ahead and play a little walking music as we go through the rest of the thing. And I'm not sure what the deal is on the music. Let's I see what the deal is on the music. I was wondering what happened on that. I had to turn it way up for the opening music, but here we go. Who else has been in the chat room? Fausta from faustasblog.com, a great Western Hemisphere blog. I read it every single day. Every day, I really do, because she is excellent at covering Western Hemisphere politics. She's also at Fausta on Twitter. You can follow her there. Guelph, Iron Kid, Juanito Cabron, Kawaiko, Marlaw 55. Juanito Cabron, Ed's off next week, but I'm just a little off. Well, you can ask the first mate sitting behind me, keeping me in the straight and narrow. I'm always just a little off, even when I'm on the air. Maybe even especially when I'm on the air. Kawaiko, Marlaw 55, Mr. Fastbucks, one of the fabulous tribbles here with us. And don't forget the Hugh Hewitt Show starts in 53 minutes. You can be a member of the Huniverse, HUGHNIVERSE.com, the troll-free web surfing experience for Hugh Hewitt listeners. I'm a member. You should be a member as well. I got to practice that for Thursday, I guess. My little promo for Hugh. Prairie Dog SD. T-Rand, the aforementioned T-Rand, is with us in his own name, even. Wow. TR4A, my cousin Mike. Great to have Mike in the chat room. Via Paso at the Ancestral Morrissey Mans. Hi, Mom. And like I said, the first mate behind me, keeping me on the straight and narrow. So don't forget, Thursday afternoon, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Central, 1 on the left coast, the debate recap. Dwayne Generalissimo Patterson and I for an hour. Talking debate, talking politics, talking all sorts of stuff, unless Dwayne's got better things to do. Anyway, until then, have yourselves a great afternoon, and don't miss a minute of the Ed Morrissey Show. See you later, folks.